I wanted to know who I was, why I was alive, and most importantly, what the future held for me.
It's a journey that I think all of us walk through on some level or another.
I think there's something in us that cries out and says, actually, no, there has to be something more.
What's right, what's wrong?
It was a 180-degree shift for me.
There was unspeakable peace in my heart.
I had a whole new set of values that began to impact my life and make me think about the direction I ought to go.
I couldn't think of anything worth seeking for in life more than that.
Well, we're back with Dr. William Lane Craig. Now, Dr. Craig, I want to ask you some of these big questions and get your insight on it. And thank you again for sharing your testimony, because I think it will resonate with a lot of people. So first question, what do you think is the convincing argument for the existence of God?
I've defended about 5 different arguments for God's existence. I think one of the powerful things about the God hypothesis is that it explains such a wide range of human experience. So I think, for example, that God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists rather than nothing. I think God is the best explanation of the origin of the universe at a time in the finite past. God is the best explanation of the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe for the existence of embodied conscious agents like ourselves. God is the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and duties in the world. And finally, I would argue that the very possibility of God's existence implies that God exists. So for all of those different reasons, I think that the hypothesis that God exists is very plausible and more plausible than it's contradictory.
Many people will say, though, that I'm a good person, I don't believe in God. What would you say to them?
That question is related to the moral argument, which goes like this. If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Without God, everything becomes relative. But number 2, objective moral values and duties do exist, from which it follows, therefore, God exists. Now, when people insist, but I am a good person without God, all they're doing is providing evidence for that second premise, that objective moral values and duties do exist. What we want to know is, what is the foundation or the ground for those objective moral values and duties that we all sense and try to live by?
Because you're right. I mean, when we look at, our society looks at things as black and white. So, we'll see somebody killing somebody and we would say that's wrong. But you're saying, what is the moral basis for this? How do we determine what's wrong and what's right?
That's exactly right. Although we may differ on many questions of secondary significance, when it comes to very basic moral questions like the intrinsic value of human beings, we recognize that there is an objectivity to moral value and duty that is imposed upon us. And the question is, where do these things come from on an atheistic worldview? They seem to be foundationless.
Let's talk about Jesus, because I don't think you could deny that Jesus existed. There's so much evidence today that proves that he did. But many people, I've had conversations, just cannot grapple with the fact that this man would sacrifice, God incarnate would sacrifice himself on a cross. How do you explain that to people who can't get their mind wrapped around it?
I think that the key to understanding Jesus of Nazareth is his resurrection from the dead. I did my doctoral work at the University of Munich in Germany on the historicity of Jesus' resurrection. And what I discovered is that the fundamental facts that undergird the inference to Jesus' resurrection are actually accepted by the wide majority of New Testament historians who have written on Jesus of Nazareth. And these would be primarily 3 in number. First would be the discovery of his empty tomb by a group of his women followers on the Sunday morning after his crucifixion. Secondly, would be the post-mortem appearances of Jesus alive to various individuals and groups. And then thirdly would be the very origin of the disciples' belief that God raised him from the dead. Those 3 facts have been firmly established by historical studies about the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And so the question is, how do you best explain these? And I would argue that there is no explanation of those three facts, which is better than the one that the original disciples themselves gave, namely, God raised him from the dead. And if God raised Jesus from the dead, that's highly significant because it's not just any old John Doe that's been raised from the dead. It is Jesus of Nazareth who, by his radical personal claims, put himself in the very place of God. If those claims have been vindicated publicly and dramatically by God himself, then Jesus was not the blasphemer that the Jewish authorities claimed he was. Rather, he was who he claimed to be, the Son of God, come for our salvation.
That opens so many other questions, but we're tight for time. I want to leave with a challenge for our viewers. You know, you came to a point where you were so immersed in your faith that you wanted to learn more. You've become a critical thinker. What is the challenge for people who do believe in this Jesus to be able to defend the gospel well? How do you do that well?
St. Anselm had a motto, faith seeking understanding. The Christian faith is not a brain-dead faith. It is a living, inquiring faith. And so viewers who are already Christians should be intellectually alive and alert to exploring this faith in all its profundity. And that will involve learning to defend what we believe as well as to explain what we believe. 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give a defense for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and reverence. And so I would encourage folks to memorize a few arguments for God's existence, to memorize those three facts that undergird the resurrection of Jesus, and be prepared to share those with an unbeliever if they should be invited to. And the best way to do this, I personally think, is to get a book like the book I wrote, On Guard, which is a kind of manual for equipping Christians to give such a positive defense of the Christian faith.
Dr. Craig, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. It's been good to be with you.